Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for attending this webinar that looks at the structure and function review of particularly with methods, but we're also going to be situating that within the bigger overall review that's undergoing at Cochrane at the moment. You're all muted at the moment, and we're going to be recording this message. So I think everybody knows me, but possibly one or two people might not. I'm Jackie Chandler, the Methods Coordinator, and I'm here with David Tovey, who's also going to speak to the wider structure and function of review groups and centers and fields. Okay, so just starting with a few rules. Why is that not working? Okay, sorry. Okay, so as I said, you're automatically muted, and we will generally invite people to speak during the discussion, or you're able to use a question box to ask questions, and we will try and get to them through the webinar, or should we be overwhelmed, we might get back to you later with regards to that. There's obviously no sort of chat box to just share comments, so just use the question box. Where hopefully you will just wait until the end of the presentation to address any questions. You can also raise your hand in a discussion, and if should you want to sort of stop me for any reason or David throughout the presentation to clarify anything, if you would just again like to raise your hand, and then we can stop and see what it is you want. Okay, so there's been a number of webinars now. The centers and fields have had webinars, the CRGs, there's been a series of webinars, and we're now doing, this is the third webinar that we've had with a particular focus around looking at structure and function for methods. So we've tweaked a number of slides along the way. There was an initial set of slides that went out to all the methods conveners at the beginning of the summer. So there's been a sort of some progressive steps as we continue our thinking. So we'll try and keep this fairly sharp, if you like. We just want to look at the overall vision, where are we going, what's the whole point of this exercise, and look at an overview of leadership and decision making, issues that are important around review production, and what would a methods network and how does that fit into the bigger picture, and then just a follow-up of the ongoing consultation plans. So this has been sort of concocted together, but really just draws in the whole sort of Strategy 2020 objective, and what are the sort of core components that we really need for that. And we need a much more efficient and reliable and effective review production system that's, provides evidence in a more speedily fashion, but also that we do need to have that based on credible and trustworthy evidence, using the best available methods that we're aware of. So rather wordy, but let's try and pack it all in. So I'm going to hand over to David to take us through looking at the bigger picture and the overview of structure and function of Cochrane.
So in this presentation I want to talk about what the part of the structure and function review that looks at review production, with particular reference to methods groups, but also to be clear that there is also there are 3 papers going to steering group around structure and function for this steering group. Papers 2 and 3 relate to the future of centers and networks and fields respectively. So out of all the changes going on in Cochrane, at the moment. There are a number of new terms that have come about, and I'm aware that people may or may not be very familiar with them. And these things, are, in a sense, are coming together. So out of the whole governance proposals, we have the change in function of the steering group into a more strategic grouping, and a change of name, so the steering group will become the governing board. We have the Council of Representatives, made up of people from within the Cochrane community who have leadership roles in executives and so on. We have, where I realise I've only recently changed in the most recent draft of the structure and function paper, an editorial board. We have the scientific committee, which is currently being recruited and will look to determine the methods that should and can be used in Cochrane reviews. And finally, we have the membership scheme. And I recognise that all these things happening at more or less the same time is intrinsically confusing for everyone. And I'll try and, through the presentation, clarify the various roles of those we come across. So, how do I do the next slide? So, okay, so the current paper one of the structure and function is around review production, and there are 4 discrete elements to the prescription. The first is of an editorial board, which in a sense will replace the co-eds exec, the current co-eds exec, and is intended to represent a broader, more externally focused group that will monitor and develop strategy, that will work with the editor-in-chief and the groups to achieve the strategic goals and the vision. And as part of that editorial board, there will be a methods representative alongside 5 coordinating editors, somebody that's responsible for noise translation, and an external person. The second core part of the prescription for structure and function is around governance and improved transparency, and it includes a memoranda of understanding that will be signed by groups and the central Cochrane, probably the editor-in-chief in this instance, perhaps by some groups, institutions, certainly not all. And that will be across the review groups. There's a parallel process going on with centres, and my guess is that over time that will be rolled out across the methods groups. The third bullet point relates to a sustainability review that has 2 core aims. Firstly, to create networks of groups that have capacity, have sufficient editorial skills, methodology skills, or access to methodology skills, that have strong leadership, that have good networks, either in clinical communities or relevant research communities, and that bring groups that have things in common and shared aims together. The second part of that will be around identifying groups that are vulnerable, whether that's because they don't have resources, or they have threatened resources, or they don't have access to appropriate methodology skills, or an editorial board that functions, or that we've identified them as being at risk of producing reviews that don't meet the quality standards. And for those groups, we will also seek to work with them, with data, with metrics, to produce some recommendations on how to address the challenges they face. And those may be quite modest, or they may be quite radical, depending on the degree of challenge. And the fourth part of the structure and function review is the integrated quality review, which we talked about extensively in April. and that relates to measures aimed at improving review quality and also review the speed to production. And that includes different editorial processes and so on. So I'll move on now. So this is a pictorial description of the editorial board, and you'll see, as I said, dominated by lead editors, coordinating editors of the groups, but with also some representatives of other factors, and notably methods. And our plan is to introduce the methods representative as being a sort of leader within the methods community in his or her own right, and somewhat akin to the role of the methods representative on steering group currently. Next slide. So the editorial board will do, as I said earlier, collective leadership model, overseeing implementation of strategy, particularly the integrated quality strategy, monitoring performance of the library. So the board is essentially is focusing particularly on the product, the library, as opposed to the organisation, and it will also have a role in determining how methods agreed by the scientific committee are to be implemented, and allocating responsibilities in relation to that implementation. I've talked about the second feature of the structure and function, which is around a memorandum of understanding, agreeing performance metrics. These may relate to prioritization activities, quality measures, speed to publication, innovation, complexity, value to users, impact on users, and so on. And in the past, we've been reasonably circumspect about how much data we've allowed into the public domain. So many of you will be not aware that we've been working quite closely with a number of groups who identified as being at high risk of producing lower standard reviews. And that, our intention really is to make that work a bit more transparent, really to try and accelerate sort of behavior change so that we don't see the same common errors and features recurring time after time. I've talked about the performance metrics. Don't need to say any more about that. So the sustainability review is really looking at what are the characteristics of the high-functioning groups, of which we have plenty in Cochrane. They tend to be groups that have secure funding. They tend to be groups that have a bit of extra capacity, so they have people that can provide editorial or content or review support, as well as the managing editors, the information specialists. They tend to be groups that have a standing within their communities, and so on. And we'll look at it as each group in relation to these criteria and other known metrics and a consideration of their scope in order to work out, whether there are other groups with whom they could be, each group could be more closely aligned, whether it be on a sort of clinical system basis or some other basis. And obviously trying to identify groups we think are particularly vulnerable. And we really want to broaden this into a sort of, not just what does it look like in terms of internal navel gazing, but looking at the world through the sort of eyes of the end users, who may be interested in a broad sort of, how are we doing in neurology or cancer or heart disease and so on. So the integrated quality strategy takes us back to these four elements. I've talked about quality, speed to publication, very much around implementing new methods. And Cochrane has, for 2 decades, implemented new methods. If you look at reviews in 5-year intervals through Cochrane's history, they're very different from one another. But certainly over the last 10 years, in the time that I've been familiar with Cochrane, the methods that we've tried to implement I think have each been challenging and haven't probably gone as smoothly or efficiently as we would have liked. So diagnostic test accuracy reviews, introduction of grade, both of which, I think our expectations at the outset were that they would happen much more smoothly and much more rapidly than actually has been the case. And finally, in relation to the integrated quality strategy, a recognition that for about a third of groups, they struggle at times to get access to appropriate methodology support. And so we need to have a group, and this came out of the method structure and function review, a group of method support unit that will probably be attached to centres, or almost certainly won't be strictly attached to the CEU, will be available to provide method support for groups and networks where that's needed. So I'm passing over to Jackie now.
Hi. So there is obviously the bigger picture, and one of the primary motives in terms of the sort of building a sustainable organisation is to create a better integrated system amongst our groups. And I think that part of that is obviously we have method groups, and these groups are very much academic research networks, people coming together around a set of methods for which they have a particular keen interest, and obviously within their institutions a research agenda of work that they're particularly focused and interested in. So thinking about how does the methods groups, of which we have currently 17, how does that actually fit in to this wider structure and function exercise that we're undergoing? And there was, as David mentioned, a structure and function that focused particularly on methods groups last year, that came out with a number of key recommendations, one of which was the method support unit, another the scientific committee, but also looking at recruitment of methodologists and how we engage people and keep people involved. And I think one of the key things is how we actually maintain our methods networks in Cochrane. So as David has already outlined, this is a shift. This is about incorporating a methods perspective within the editorial board. I believe you're dropping it. Is that
That's right. Said? Sorry, I realise that the paper changes every day. Today's the last day the paper changes. It's going on.
Okay. So advisors is removed, and it's now the editorial board. But it seems to be an important shift and move to have that representation on an editorial board. So we will have a scientific committee and an editorial board. So it's important to perhaps keep those two things and understand that these are new structures, that scientific will be heavily focused in the methods direction, but also the importance of having this representation on this board. And so pushing that sort of integration, creating a kind of collective leadership model, and the importance of overseeing better implementation of methods in a better integrated way, and to just monitor the sort of broader scope of the library and the CDSR in terms of the reviews that we're publishing. So this is really just most people, I think everybody on the call probably is not new to this, but there's been a proliferation, obviously, of interested people who've come in under the Cochrane umbrella to develop their research interests. This is currently where we are at 2016, where we have 17 covering all this range of methods. And then obviously in 2017, there are others that are interested in coming in, and we have to think about how do we manage this proliferation of interest, and how we create an organisational structure that can actually make that effective and work within Cochrane. So a methods network is, thinking about how we bring these research networks, of which these could expand, as I've just shown to you. How can we bring them into a better format, into a more integrated format? And the key driver has been throughout this structure and function review, I think David touched on it earlier, is how do people outside, stakeholders, how do they see what we're doing, understand what we're doing, how do they make contact with us? Where is there a sort of clear focal point around the different research networks that we have working in Cochrane? So thinking about creating a larger concept of a network is that it's not really just around clustering groups or just grouping people, but to think about how we have a leadership structure, that there's clearly a focal point for people to identify us, but also it provides a locus for accountability and activity. And I think the key motive that I keep repeating, I think, is trying to create greater interconnectivity between our individual groups throughout Cochrane. So thinking more about the sort of leadership structure, and we have a methods board and we have a methods executive, but needing to think more about how a structure would actually integrate the 17 groups in a way that actually provides some kind of strategic level decision making alongside with the scientific committee, provide some oversight for all the internal groups and the functions, encouraging greater collaboration across the groups, and providing obviously part of that has been that some groups feel very peripheral, very on the outside, because perhaps some of their methods are perhaps more complex and they're difficult to integrate into the review structure, such as IPD, but also a feeling that, like the patient-reported outcome group, often feel perhaps sort of excluded, not taken up by review groups. So there is an issue to think about the various different networks and how they can cooperate together and work together, and is there a better way of us looking at organising that? And by coming to there is an opportunity to think about how collectively we look at financial support and supporting network activities, rather than has been the case where the 17 groups aren't funded. Some have been able to, one or two have been able to get some funding for their activities, but essentially I think people are struggling to support the kind of demands, if you like, that that Cochrane is asking of them without any financial support. So in looking at the sort of governance of a potential methods network, this has been discussed with, a bit before with the CRGs, and looking at the possibility of having some form of independent legal status, a discrete identity, but obviously an accountability at the higher level of the network, and that memorandum of understanding or nature of the relationship between the network and Cochrane is obviously something that has to be given some greater thought, but it is that the network can, in a sense, self-organise within itself and have a relationship with Cochrane at higher levels. So it's looking at whether we develop a single form of leadership, but that has the representation of the different methods groups in it, might look like, in moving away from a sort of board and an executive model. One of the ideas has been the sort of lead conveners convoy, by having each network having a lead convener. So there are various ideas around, but they need, I think it's thinking about the vision and then moving on to the specifics. So there has been a number of ideas around the sort of internal organisation of a methods network, and one could maintain the individual research networks, the current group structure is retained, but just create a kind of higher level of leadership function that operates alongside, you know, supporting the scientific committee and supporting the editorial board. There's been other ideas around looking at as reforming the groups in different ways, of having a sort of an applied methods approach that looks very much at the sort of review methods. So, you know, the sort of standard review approach, there's a cluster of essential sort of groups that could come together: bias, grade, stats, etc. Searching could come together as a particular cluster of groups, but also looking at other ways of how the others might groups might cluster around special topics, if you think about how the handbook is organised. Other suggestions have been around just having a range of methodologists, because obviously a number of the key conveners of these groups overlap a number of groups. People work across the piece. So is there a different way of looking at that? One of the key messages around this is obviously that any kind of restructuring or reforming groups is a risk, because, you know, it's what's motivating people to come to the table of developing these research networks in the first place, but also that people will say it requires some kind of monetary input to actually support that. Sorry. So we're just finishing our webinar, and we're going to open up for some discussions. And just to say that this is the final webinar, and then we will be moving on to those people that are able to get to the Seoul Colloquium, so that we can discuss some of these ideas further and take them forward. As David has mentioned, there will be a paper going to the steering group, which provides a bigger picture, and the methods board will try and go through looking at some of the details and thinking about the way forward. Following the Seoul Colloquium, there is going to be a time, I think that, I'm not sure if you mentioned it, David, but the review groups and certainly the methods groups can look a bit more at in detail of what the implications are for each group, as well as for the groups collectively. Did you want to?
Well, just one thing to add, I realised I didn't say, and for particularly members of the methods community on the call, the paper and the thinking that we've been doing and the work that we've been doing over the last 3 or 4 months has focused very heavily on review production. We've drawn out some aspects of the method, structure and function paper, and I think that you could say that a number of elements of those are being developed in different forms. But I want to be really clear that I recognize that in some ways, thinking about what this methods network or a proposed methods network might look like is at a really, really early stage, and we need a real process of thinking and consulting and talking before we can really clarify what that might look like. Nobody's naive about where we are in relation to that. There is a lot of work still to be done. Okay, looks like there's a chat or a question there somewhere. If you click on that one.
Oh, okay.
So I think we're over to you. Any questions? I think you can probably shout out, or you can type. You probably can't shout out, so you may have to put your hand up or something.
Okay. So.
Any hands up?
No.
Or just scroll up. Those of you in the UK, obviously, it's dangerously close to lunch, but some of you aren't in the UK, so.
Does anybody have any kind of overall view about the structure and function exercise, perhaps how it's being conducted, whether there is any people just feeling generally fatigued by everything, because I think there's been a lot of emails coming out, a lot of communication from Cochrane. Okay, Barney has said he's supporting the restructuring, and there is some overlap between existing MGs, which is confusing and unhelpful.
Barney, I very much agree with that, but at the moment, I think we haven't really come up with solutions that have a strong support. I must say, having tried to do this exercise within the review groups, you know, it's I think quite a lot of people would agree that we need a solution, but when you start doing it, you get lots of, well, we can't possibly work with that group, or I'm not working with them, or they nicked a review of us, I'm not going to, you know, and it all gets very confusing. But I think that is the next step, and probably in review group land we will be thinking about groups identifying one another as groups they can work with around either a clinical specialty or geographic co-location or existing relationships, because in some ways lots of groups have some potential interaction with large numbers of other groups, even if that doesn't happen currently. But it's work to be done, I think. Philip, well, essentially, Philip, I'm taking this in terms of the urology group. We'll certainly want to think about for each group, you know, how groups are performing in terms of output, in terms of impact, in terms of resource, and how much resources groups have, and how solid that is. And then we'll want to think about, are there relationships with other groups that could that could be developed that would strengthen the editorial base as a whole, or you know, does each group need to be treated as an individual group or as vulnerable? So in the first instance, it means that nothing will change for the individual groups. We're not imposing a new structure per se. There's a period of consultation and discussion that will go on, and then we will come up with fairly firm recommendations to the editorial board, to board of governors if necessary, if we think there are paths that need to be taken that, you know, we can't organise, for which we don't have current consent.
Okay, Sally wanted to speak, and
yeah.
I'm just struggling. Louisa, can you see if you can unmute people? Because I just don't seem to be able to unmute people. Am I doing something wrong?
I will try.
So Barney's going to...
Barney's going to... So who would you like me to unmute? Sally?
Sally.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, don't know why I couldn't do it. Okay, Sally, do you want to go ahead?
I'm sorry I'm late to the call. I won't be at the methods board in October. I wondered if there's any other way to contribute to the discussion.
Did you have anything you wanted to say now? We're recording.
No, because I've literally just joined because I've been on another call and it overran, so I've not picked up the content, so I don't feel in a very good position to do that, but I'll watch it again when I watch the recording, so I'll catch up on the content.
Sally, so one thing, and this applies to everybody, the papers relating to structure and function will be open access. So in the past they've been restricted to the steering group, and they will be made open access either on Friday or Saturday, and we are specifically inviting people to send written comments if they can't come to the sole meeting in advance of the meeting, and we'll make sure they get fed in some form. obviously, well, not obviously, but as it happens, the steering group meeting will happen one day before the meetings in Seoul to discuss structure and function, and I think probably about the same time as the methods board is meeting. So any thoughts about the papers would be useful in advance of those meetings. After those meetings, clearly there will have to be reports going out describing what steering groups agreed to and what we're planning, and there will be further opportunities to feed in during that process. So I see the first 3 or 4 months of this project post-Seoul colloquium as being about developing an implementation plan and taking people's views, because we recognise that attendance at Seoul will be very limited, and even if people prepared to join meetings remotely, it may be very unsuitable time differences. So we'll record the meetings that we can record, but we'll also make sure that other people who can't get to Seoul and can't join the meetings and nonetheless have an opportunity to feed in their perspectives.
So based on waiting for that paper, the plan would have been to send out the board agenda with the paper next week, and I think part of the request in that will be to try and get comments back from people if they're not attending, because I think it would be good to feed those comments into the actual methods board meeting itself as well. So Sally, it's about making sure your comments get to the board, the methods board.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Barney, I think Vivian wants us to read out questions. Philip is thinking it's making sense about building alliances and working together. Barney's making the point that it's important for the Cochrane Methods Network to focus on methods that are important for Cochrane, so ideally prioritised by users, challenges they face, rather than methodologists. I think this should be supported, but worry that creating the right incentives for participation by university folk may be tricky, balancing realistic levels of financial support versus what university folk may think they're going to get out of it. But could you unmute Barney, please, Louisa?
Yes.
Barney, I think that I wondered if you are going to be in Seoul, and will you be at the methods board?
I'm afraid I'm not going to be in Seoul. It's just too expensive and so on for me. I can't make it.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I've said this to you before, Jackie, so I just wanted to put it out there for the wider group. That,
so one of the things is that at the methods board I have got a piece around looking at these issues and our ongoing relationship and partnership with universities through our individual researchers that work with it. So that is something I've also discussed with Holger, and obviously I think did come up at the mid-year meeting in April, and I think we do need to do a piece of work around that.
So I think the parallel I'd like to make is that you know, I'm on various forums in the UK where there's concern that some review groups aren't doing the reviews that matter. The whole prioritization process in review groups is an agenda item, and you know, I have the same feeling, more as a spectator, I suppose, that the methods work that's being done and that increasingly I hear about when I go to colloquia is not really addressing the seriously important questions that review production faces, and I just think it's sensible to align that.
Well, we very strongly agree with that, Barney. Just to your second point about creating incentives, I'm aware that that's a challenge, but actually within the proposal that we're going to put to steering group, as people will see, there will be some funding for the sort of methods lead on the editorial board and also for a method support unit. And in addition to that, for the method support unit people, there will be an honorary title. I don't know how much that matters to people, and also an expectation that if they provide substantial input into individual reviews, which I assume they will, they would also be credited as authors on those reviews, and that assuming they meet the criteria sufficiently. So trying to identify financial and non-financial incentives, but to be honest, we would be very interested in anybody's thoughts on how to increase that. You know, what we need throughout all of this process, both whether they're people talking about editors or author teams or methodologists, is to create incentives for people to come into Cochrane and develop their careers and develop professional opportunities through Cochrane, because, as you say, that is the way that, in the end, in an academic career, you know, that's the way to make sure that we attract people appropriately.
Can I come back on that, David, just briefly?
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the best way to do this. It's the kind of thing where I'd really like some in-depth qualitative interviews with serious methodologist contributors currently to find out what they think they're getting out of it and why they participate. Now, that's probably beyond the resources and may not reflect the diversity of contributors anyhow. But I wondered if there could be some kind of SurveyMonkey type survey of methodologists following Seoul, where the bomb is exploded, if you like, that we were looking for ways to redo this and focus on what's important to Cochrane for what would make contributors across all the methods groups want to be involved.
We could certainly. I'm very up for a process such as that. We do have some intelligence. It's probably 3 or 4 years old now, from previous questionnaires. We could go back and look at what we got out of that. It may well be that we haven't got enough or it's out of date, but I would be very keen to look at that and look at what are particularly the non-financial incentives, because I think in many cases they are going to be more important than the financial ones.
I mean, we did address that in the method, structure, and function review, and so and looked at also disincentives, and a lot of that is around pressure of work. But one thing that's always seemed to be a key issue is that certainly for researchers is the idea that you would get that kind of diffusion and spread of your research activity across Cochrane. That has got to be a key motivator, I would have thought, for researchers.
Yeah, but I don't think that's how it's worked. I think the number of instances where you've got an I-squared that's with a citation rate of over 10,000 or probably 20,000 now are actually very small. What I'm seeing are minor tweaks on really insignificant problems in order to do a PhD that has, I'm sorry, that may sound, I don't mean it quite as bluntly as that, but it's not what Cochrane is after. People aren't stepping up to the plate to tackle the really important questions. Problems, challenges.
So that's very much, I think, why we're setting up the scientific committee to develop that prioritised research agenda. That's very much what the role of the scientific committee would be.
And also, just to say, the Strategic Methods Fund explicitly talks about methods that are important to end users. So, I know that Peter's just raised the priorities issue, which I think is really important, and Barney makes the point, and you've made it many times before, Barney, that we need to think about methods prioritization in terms of the external perspective, the end user perspective, rather than the methodologies. And of course, these can overlap, and that's sort of very, very important that we favour the priorities that meet the most to the end users, and that's built in, as I say, to the Strategic Methods Fund, and it should be built into all future endeavours as well.
Okay. Are there any other comments from other people that haven't had an opportunity to And I can ask Louisa to unmute you, because I don't know why I'm not working.
Sally has commented and Peter Tugwell have commented on the questions panel, so I don't know if they want an opportunity to follow up.
Shall we unmute Peter?
Yeah.
And Bev Chase. So Peter, if you'd like to go first.
No, I just wanted a resounding amen to what Barney is suggesting. And I had a chance to talk with David last week about the priorities issue. I know it's so much else is going on, but I'm arguing strongly for this to be given a high priority by both review groups and methods together.
Great, thank you. And if you could mute Peter and unmute Sally. Sally, would you like to chip in?
Sure, there's two things. One is that some methodologists aren't part of academic institutions and sit outside the normal working relationships, and that presents interesting problems for those of us that do it in that way. And the second, on the point of prioritisation, is that, you know, I think one of the issues we face is that in prioritisation there's technical work and then there's interpretive work, and the technical stuff is, I think, more straightforward and probably what Cochrane is more used to, using data, using update data, using new trials, you know, as proxy measures for prioritisation. The interpretive stuff, which is what we've been talking about, what matters to users, is more complex, and there isn't a huge amount of consensus about what really works in that regard. And I think that's why our group struggle to, at times, to perhaps respond to the challenges of what the review groups need. But we're up for the discussion.
Okay.
Great.
And Bev Shea, could you mute others and unmute Bev Shea? Great, thanks. Hi, Bev.
Hi there, thanks, that's great. Just a quick comment, I guess, from, well, agreeing with Barney, but also from some of the early work in Cochrane, we spent so much time training reviewers and doing this, and I think from the methods perspective, I think we do need to spend more time learning.
Sorry, we're losing you. Could you just type what you're going to say? Because I think.
Have one more go.
Yeah.
Trouble here.
We heard you very well, and then we lost you. So just try once more.
Okay. I was just saying that I think some of the early work in Cochrane, we spent so much time training people about doing the reviews, but we spent less time with in our own universities and environment with the methods training. And I think that's something, an important component that could be built into this process as well. And I think, you know, I'm totally supportive of Barney's comments there. I think the universities, it's essential to get the buy-in from the universities, and yeah, I just think we need to spend more time with the methods component, the e-learning, the training for methods.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think a lot to agree with there. To some extent, we haven't really factored in very much the training, learning strategy and the proposals related to that into the structure and function review, simply because we didn't want to be seen to be throwing in the kitchen sink in a way. So you know, it's a really core component of all this, and making sure that the training and learning opportunities are spread widely, and that they don't just concentrate on people at the very inexperienced end, but also people that have some expertise and experience but wanting to develop skills further, and as you say, providing opportunities for methodologists and working with institutions is really important too. So I agree completely.
Okay, can you mute Bev, please, Lisa? Thank you. We had a bit of a crackle there. Sorry, Bev. Okay. anything further anybody'd like to raise? Any further comments? And obviously, if you have anything subsequently that occurs to you, there's no problem about sending them to myself, and I will make sure that they're pulled together. Okay, it looks like everybody has had their fill, I think, of this webinar. So all I can say is thank you very much for giving up your time, and we hope to obviously take this forward, and obviously we'll be constantly communicating. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and as I say, don't hesitate to contact Jackie or me directly in relation to any ideas or concerns that you have. And you should all have access to the papers for the steering group in the next 3 or 4 days. Have a good day.
Bye. Right.